Resident Evil 4 was released in 2005 and then ported to the Nintendo Wii 2 years later. I owned a Nintendo Wii, but at this point I'd never even heard of the Resident Evil series. Until 2008, when my next door neighbor just randomly gifted me a giant bag of video games. Amongst them was World Championship Darts, SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, and Resident Evil 4. I remember pulling Resi out of the bag, looking at the cover, and being immediately terrified by it. The Wii version of the game had this black and white silhouette of a guy in the forest with a sack over his head and a chainsaw in his hand. That was more than enough to terrify me when I was 9 years old. So yeah, I owned the game, but I never once played it. The furthest I got was putting the disc into my console to see how it looked on the menu screen, then taking it out and immediately putting it back in the box. And despite having zero intentions of ever actually playing this game, I kept it around for years and years, so it was always at the back of my mind. But before I would even consider playing it, I had a long journey ahead of me. In October 2012, Resident Evil 6 released, and this was my first actual interaction with the series in any real capacity. I was admittedly still quite scared of horror games at this point, but horror was big on YouTube, and someone I watched at the time was doing a let's play of the game. I decided to watch the entire thing, and I enjoyed it, but it's a very different experience to watch than to play yourself. Fast forward to October 2016, I didn't have a ton of money to buy games, but what I did have was a PS Plus subscription, which would get me a couple of new games at no extra cost every month all year round. And wouldn't you know it, the first Resident Evil game came to PS Plus. So, fittingly enough, this was my first time playing a Resident Evil game for myself. And I loved it to bits, tank controls and all. I remember mentioning that I was playing it for the first time to a few of my older mentors and peers that were in their 30s or 40s at the time, and they told me how they played Resi 1 when they were about my age too, and gave me little hints as to where I should go next to progress or find certain weapons. With their assistance, I eventually completed Resi 1, and ultimately felt super surprised that I loved the game as much as I did. Given the fact that the game was 20 years old at this point, I really wasn't expecting that much. I figured it would feel dated and rough around the edges, but no, I actually loved pretty much everything that was there. But for some reason, I still wasn't quite ready to give Resi 4 a shot yet. Then, January 2019 came along with the Resident Evil 2 remake. This is where they really got me. They had that limited time one-shot demo, and I remember everyone streaming themselves playing it through on the same night. Some were speedrunning it, some were gathering as much footage as they could, and some were just casually enjoying it. I downloaded it myself and was floored by the quality of the game. I ended up buying it for myself eventually when it went on sale. At this point, I would describe myself as a budding Resident Evil fan. I was eager to play all future entries, and that's what I ended up doing with the releases of the 3 remake, Biohazard, and Village. Though after all of those, I was hungry for more, but there was nothing new yet. Then I saw Resident Evil 4 went on sale on the Nintendo Switch eShop. Now that sparked some memories. This is when I asked my friends to help me pick between Resi 4 or a different game I had my eyes on at the time, and they simply said, pick the one with the twink. And so I finally gave Resident Evil 4 its chance. This was in 2022. That's when I started playing Resident Evil 4, and I hated it. At first, I kept dying in the first area to the one-hit chainsaw guy, and I wasn't aware that I had to just wait out a timer for the bell to ring to progress past that first area, so I was getting quite frustrated that I couldn't find out what I was supposed to be doing. On top of that, I was definitely struggling to get used to the controls the entire time. When I did overcome that section, I kept stepping on bear traps, running out of bullets, and dying some more. There were also just a lot of smaller knowledge checks that I couldn't pass, like using flashbangs on exposed boogie boys, or shooting enemies' legs to open them up for a big kick, knowing that would have made life much easier. The game never teaches you any of these things though, and it intentionally wants to throw you into the deep end as quickly as possible. Because of these things, I took a break from it, and then came back to it in 2023. This time, I'd managed to get up to the castle section, but I still wasn't feeling it, so I took yet another break. But the game lingered in my head as something unbeat, and was something that I wanted to play seeing as I owned it already. So, I came back to it again. This time, though, something started to click. From the castle section onwards, I just kept on playing it. I really started to love my time with the game. I slowly improved as a player. I could see my aim improving, and I started to use the 180 to retreat and reposition when I needed. I got more and more weapons, completely stopped running out of ammo, and I understood that you could essentially stun the enemies by shooting their legs and doing suplexes on them. I also think I just prefer the area design of the entire second half of the game when compared to the little village at the start. I found the puzzles and traps more fascinating, and I thought the variation in enemy types was cool. Then I finally reached the end, and to my surprise, I honestly did have a good time. My verdict was that it was fun, but it was far from perfect, and that would have been it. But then I kind of just kept on thinking about it. Personally, I do love tank controls, and they're seldom seen in new titles today. Resident Evil 4 is probably one of the best games to exist that uses tank controls, so for that alone, it's pretty great. I think Resi 4 has really unique movement and pacing that, in all honesty, I kind of enjoy more than games with more standard movement controls. Tank controls might not be very intuitive at first, but it creates a very particular pace. When a game is designed with tank controls in mind, you find yourself searching for safe spots to stand and fight, typically places where you know you can 180 and retreat or loop back on yourself. The enemies and yourself also tend to be a bit slower, creating an environment where your decisions have to be more deliberate because it's harder to undo a poor decision. I haven't really talked about it yet, but I think it's also wonderfully trashy. A lot of video games don't have the best writing, but I think the more entertaining amongst them are the ones that don't take themselves too seriously. The Resident Evil series is exactly that for me, for the most part. It's crazy to me how I spent 16 years essentially ignoring Resi 4 despite owning it, then hating it when I did start, but now I'm definitely a fan, and I'm thinking of replaying it to see how I feel about the first half with my current experience. As of recording, I haven't actually played the Resident Evil 4 remake. I'm waiting for a sale which I'll predict will come this October. But after eventually enjoying the original as much as I have and seeing the reviews for the remake, I'm really excited to give it a go. And well, that's the story of how I took 16 years to get around to beating Resident Evil 4. I hope you enjoyed this video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.